Hey, this is Joe, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make some carbon fiber fenders. In earlier videos we took existing parts and we skinned those parts with carbon fiber. It looks very nice, but what you end up having is the original plastic part, or whatever the material is that you're skinning, and then added to that the weight of the original part, in this case the fender, the weight of the resin, and the weight of the carbon fiber sitting on top. So it adds more weight. And what is really nice to do is to actually make a part out of pure carbon fiber. It's lighter, it's stronger, and that's what we're going to show you how to do in these videos coming up. In order to make a carbon fiber part that isn't skinned, we need to make a mold. In the industry, that's often called tooling. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make a female mold in which we can then lay up the carbon fiber and resin in, and the part we pull off of that then becomes the male part. In order to make a mold, we either can use the original fender parts as the male portion of the mold, in the industry referred to as a plug, or we can take something like foam and we could shape it down with a sanding block and make the plug out of, in this case, foam, and then we can actually make the mold or tooling by using the plug and then laying up over the plug to make the female portion of the mold or tooling that we can then make the male part out of carbon fiber. Now the question in this case is, why can't we just use these fender parts to make the mold? And the answer is, if you look very closely, you'll see some very sharp edges along the fender. And fiberglass, Kevlar, and carbon fiber, when you lay them up or laminate them on a surface, does not like the sharp edges. So when you try to fold that fabric, or that carbon fiber in this case, over the mold, these sharp edges will cause delamination, and the carbon will not be compacted perfectly on the mold surface. So we cannot use these fenders to make the mold surface. What we have to do is we have to shape, and we're going to use foam to do that. We're going to shape these pieces of foam in a very smooth radius pattern without these sharp edges. And so we're going to make two plugs, and then we're going to take these plugs and then make the molds from the plugs. So first off, what we're going to do, and if you look here, I have a piece of foam, and the height is pretty close to even with the height of the fender. Same thing in this particular surface. I have a shaped piece of foam here with the proper height, and then we're going to take our sanding block and we're going to shape this foam in a nice curve radius, both lengthwise and widthwise, so we'll get a nice radiused fender surface or plug in the shape, or fairly close to the shape, of the original fenders. And then what we'll do is we'll come along and we'll take these plugs, we'll laminate some fiberglass over in order to make the female mold or tooling, in order then we can take that mold and we can pull and laminate carbon fiber on that mold and pull off our carbon fiber parts. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll take our sanding block here, we'll start shaping these pieces of foam to match as close as we can the fenders, and then we'll use these plugs to make our mold for the final finished carbon fiber parts. As you can see, we have a curve running lengthwise, and we have a curve widthwise. So we're going to take the foam and we're going to curve it lengthwise and radius it in the width to give us something similar to this shape, but more rounded and without these very sharp corners here. So let's get started with that. I have some 60 grit sandpaper mounted to a sanding block here, and so we're now going to start shaping Get yourself a brush, and then you can clean the surface of your sanding block so you get a better grit on the sandpaper. Here's the way we're looking so far. Try to get the shape symmetrical on both sides, and we're just going to keep on working this, and then we'll start shaping the length of the foam block here. Another step we're doing is we're radiusing the nose of the plug. Notice I'm shaping it a little bit rounder. This is more of a flatter edge, so I'm going to shape this a little bit rounder. So again, we have the liberty to customize the shape of this fender in whichever way we want. As you start shaping and the foam gets a little thin, you want to be very gentle so you don't tear some of the foam. We're going to come along after this is done and put a coat of epoxy on top to make a smooth surface and also to make this plug a little stronger. Now, one thing I'm not doing, if you'll notice, the bottom of the fender is radiused as well. We're not going to do that on the bottom of the plug. We want the plug to set flat on the surface we're going to laminate on to make the mold. What we can do is, after we pull the part out of the mold, then we can take a Dremel tool and we can shape the bottom of the finished part to match this curve. Here's the shaped plug and the original fender. Notice I have a little bit more of a rounded nose, and then I have the nice radiused sides. I like it a little bit more rounded than squared off. So we're going to finish up the other fender, and then we're going to put some epoxy on this and then touch it up and see how they look. If they don't look as good as I want, then we can always redo it. Foam is pretty cheap. So let's start shaping the other fender. On the rear fender, if you notice, the angle on the other side is much steeper than the front fender, the shorter fender. So what we're going to have to do is we had to make the foam block much higher than the front fender. So if you notice now, that way we can come in later after on the finished part, and we can then radius out the inside or the lower side of the finished part. So as a result, we have to make the rear fender much higher. We have the rear fender shape now a little bit different, but if you compare the heights, we're pretty close. And it's looking not too bad. We're going to put some epoxy on both of these pieces now, the plugs, and that will firm them up. Then we can sand them very smooth. We'll start out with 120, work our way up to 400, and then maybe do a little polishing so that when you actually make the mold off of these plugs, the mold surface is going to be very, very smooth, and you want that when you pull the carbon fiber part out of the mold. You want it very glossy, very smooth, with minimal amounts of sanding and buffing. So there's that. Let's go ahead and we'll go into the shop now, and we'll coat these two plugs with some epoxy. We'll let them cure, and then we'll do some sanding on them and see how they look.